The leadership of one man that is changing lives here in Kenya as well as the African continent and beyond. It is an NGO going by the name Crutches for Africa. David Bolt is Tobot, rather, is the director of Crutches for Africa, and he's here with me this morning. David, thank you so much for making time.
Happy to be here.
And thank you for agreeing to come on set and talk about this. Tell me a little bit about the organization, the NGO Crutches for Africa. What is it about?
It's about giving people freedom through mobility. So many people are locked down because of disability that they don't have access to the basic elements of life. Water, as an example. Water is, of course, extremely important. But if you can't get to the well because your mobility doesn't allow you to go there, then mobility becomes the key for being part of life in your community. Same thing with education. If you can't get to school, then mobility is the key issue. And so that's really, for me, and the way I see things, is that mobility is the key to life.
And that's what Crutches of Africa seeks to do, to fill in that gap between persons living with disability and that aspect of the disadvantaged aspect, where, as you've mentioned, if it's going to the well and looking for water, or if it's going to school.
Right. The gap is pretty large between being completely mobile and being in a wheelchair.
Right.
And this was something that I saw in 2005 in Uganda, was that there was a lot of attention to wheelchairs, and the gap between a wheelchair and being perfectly mobile was, there was nothing there. There were no crutches, there were no walking frames. Of course, you can always cut a stick just for a walking stick, but those elements were missing, and I realized that we had excess in the United States. So we began to gather those together and to ship them into countries where the need was extremely high. And so as we've developed, we went from our very first collection of 235 pairs of crutches to now that we distributed those in Uganda. And since then, we have in total, in 26 different countries, distributed 106,000 pieces of equipment to people in desperate need for this. It's just not available.
So Crutches for Africa is represented, or it has its mapping in 26 countries?
16 countries in Africa so far. We're always interested to open up new countries. The demand is extremely high. And then beyond Africa, we've been in 10 other countries outside of Africa that have come to us and requested assistance and the need for mobility equipment.
What inspired you to start Crutches for Africa?
I'm sorry, say again?
What inspired you to start Crutches for Africa?
Well, I survived polio myself. I had polio when I was 2.5 years old. 3 weeks after Dr. Salk announced that he had a successful vaccine. And so it was the spring of 1955. And I think really that is a cornerstone in making lemonade from lemons for me, is that what was set up against me in a disease and in a disability ended up being a blessing for other people, because I get it. I've been there, I've done that. And I find that so many times that people who have never been on crutches don't understand what it's like to face a stairway, up or down. So it's all of these challenges. And then, of course, we see people that are crawling on the ground. We see people that are scooting along on their knuckles and their rear end. And these kind of challenges are beyond the scope of anything that we can imagine. And here in Nairobi yesterday, we saw a man who was bent over, and he would move his hands forward, and then he'd reach down and pull a foot and pull another foot, and then repeat the process. And that's how he moves. That's the only way he can get around. And so the more I'm involved with this, the longer I am involved, the more I see such a tremendous need. And I gotta tell you, it pulls at my heart, because we always run out. There's always an end to the container that we ship. So we ship about 3,000 items per container, And like I say, we always run out, and somebody is always left wanting.
3,000. So far, for Kenya in itself, how many crunches have you been able to give out?
In Kenya, we have given out approximately 35,000 pieces of equipment. We've done, I believe it's now 13 containers into Kenya, because we've been focusing on Kenya. I'm very interested in completing a country, but when I say completing, there's always boda accidents.
Right.
There's always more and more need, but I think there's a point at which we reach an equilibrium, and so that we have the majority of the people who need equipment, that have needed it for years, have what they need.
Do you think we'll get to that point where the equilibrium is met?
Absolutely, but I need help.
Do you think the government is doing enough?
Boy, my government or yours?
Okay, on our side, let's start with the Kenyan government.
I was just trying to dodge that for a second. So.
Do you think they're doing enough to empower such NGOs that are working with Kenyans on the ground and helping them?
Right. You have to understand that I never feel like anyone is doing enough. I don't feel like I'm doing enough. In some ways, my hands are tied because of a lack of finances, because no one is paid in our organization. So having the funds to be able to ship and clear customs and all of those things holds us back. There is so much material that is available in the United States, and then there's all the European countries as well. And we have requests that come from them. Australia, New Zealand, all of these countries have got so much material that comes in. Somebody uses it for 2 or 3 days, and they're finished with it, so they put it in the closet or in the garage. Here's another scenario. Grandma dies, and she's in a nursing home, and so once she passes, she had a wheelchair, a walking frame, and 5 or 6 canes. Now, nobody wants this, because everybody that's coming in to replace her has the same thing. Family doesn't want it. So if they don't take it, the nursing home is stuck with it, and it just gets piled up in a shed or a spare room until it gets to be too much, and then it goes to the landfill. The landfill. So all this perfectly good equipment ends up rotting in the ground. So in that way, we're standing in the gap in a very environmentally aware situation, that we're rescuing this stuff on that side, and then being involved and getting it into other countries like Kenya. Then we are building ties with governments, not only in Kenya, but really everywhere we go, to increase the awareness of so many things. That one is the need. Certainly access is another huge area. But does the government do enough? Of course, I have to say that they're doing their best, but there's always more that can be done.
They could do better, they could do more.
We can all do better. There's an empathy element that is not present. Simply just being dropped off at the wrong side of the street, instead of in front of the door. So somebody has to do a U-turn to drop someone off at the door instead. Another example that I've seen in so many different, all countries that we go into, is the accessibility issue. They have disability offices on the 9th floor and no access with an elevator.
Oh, wow.
So how does someone approach the disability office and the people they need to be speaking with when it's on the 9th floor? And I face this myself, and when I go in and meet public officials, and it's a trial.
Are there certain policies, perhaps, or laws that probably would strengthen and empower what you are doing right now that would help some of these challenges that you're seeing, access, as you've mentioned? Are there some policies that perhaps you'd like to see being put within Parliament here in Kenya, and probably the other African countries?
Right. One of the things that I have to congratulate Kenya on is the Constitution, that all things should be, for people that have disabilities, shouldn't be taxed. What I would like to see in Kenya is the implementation of this law and these rules.
And that's
because
where we're lucky.
There's a huge gap between what it says in the Constitution and what actually happens.
Big difference. Is it the same thing within other African countries?
It is definitely a challenge in every country that we go into. And I find that if there are officials who, again, have experienced a disability, they're much more aware of what the issues are.
Right.
Because if you can't, if you roll up in a wheelchair and there's no ramp, or let's just look at the sidewalks. Go into any major city and there's businesses doing business on the sidewalk. Let's talk about shoes for a second. Someone's selling shoes and they've got them scattered all over the sidewalk, and you have a narrow little path, which is your access to be able to just go down the street. And that's if indeed there is a sidewalk. Just walk around on any of the sidewalks and imagine what it's like to try to get down that sidewalk in a wheelchair. There's posts in the middle of the sidewalk. You can't get around. So even just the simple placement of any kind of utility pole or security barrier, and it ends up being an obstacle for the disabled.
I mean, David, what you're doing is tremendous. It is fantastic work. I have to ask, though, how are you able to reach then perhaps people living with disabilities beyond Nairobi? I'm talking about places like Turkana or Garissa or Marsabit, where in itself infrastructure such as roads is already a challenge in itself.
Right.
So how is the organization able to meet the needs of those beyond Nairobi?
Well, and that's really a major part of what we do, is reaching beyond the capital cities, beyond Mombasa, beyond the port, and to go out as far as we can away from the cities, because those are the underserved areas. And we do that simply by spending money to rent trucks and to move the material out as far as we possibly can. And it's remarkable how easy it is to distribute in these communities. And of course, data is extremely important, that we follow up with the people that we've given to, so that we know the next time we come into that area, okay, you got a wheelchair. Why are you coming back to us for a wheelchair? What happened to your wheelchair? But I find that most people with disabilities are so overjoyed to have something that they never envisioned in their lives that they would ever see or have. And I have to tell you that we have seen absolute miracles. Watching a young man in Sigomre that took his first steps at 19 years old because he had a pair of crutches. Now there's this beautiful link between somebody who donated the crutches to Crutches for Africa in the United States, and we then transport them here and get them out, and with the help of so many different groups that we partner with in country. An example would be Rotary clubs, and I'm a Rotarian, so we use that network so that also the network there helps to supply a lot of eyes to watch the process so that things don't go awry in the distribution system. But being able to give this young man a pair of crutches and watch him hesitantly take his very first step. Now, he had a friend that carried him in, and his friend is hovering, taking care that he's not going to fall, and he takes another step. And you can see it's like evaporation. The fear just lifts off of him because he starts out afraid he's going to fail, that he's going to fall. And he takes another step and another step. And in a week, it's much better. In a month, even better. And we see this time and time again, where we see people who have been disabled, and the biggest reason is because they don't have access to the material to help them, the right kind of tools to help them to be mobile. It
is such inspiring stories, David, that keeps you going every single day. I mean, because that was powerful.
Yeah, I think that the biggest thing for me is the the people that I see when I lay down to sleep at night, the joy on people's faces definitely is a motivating factor. The other side of that is the dejection of that next person that does not have because we run out of material. So it motivates me to keep going. And really my mandate is go faster, get more done. And so it ends up that we work hard to collect more material. And we're collecting in about 12 states now in the United States. So it's all over the country, but not in every area. My vision is that we'll be in every state, we'll be collecting every piece of equipment that is not needed or being used or simply in surplus.
We've already highlighted what perhaps the government can do. Let's touch a little bit on the private sector, their mandate in making sure that the communities that they're in as well are helped. This could be certain hospitals. What would you like to see the private sector, its role, their job to do in order to inspire or to empower organizations like Crutches for Africa?
Yeah, it goes down to the simplest thing of opening the door for somebody that's disabled.
Right.
One of our mottos, I have many mottos, but one of them is a hand up, not a handout. And I really firmly believe that when the community recognizes that these people are human beings and it, by no fault of theirs, that they are in this situation. They did not choose to be there. It is not the sins of the fathers and mothers that brought them to this position.
Hand up, not hand down. That is fantastic.
Yeah. So that's part of the picture. The other part where I see anyone can get involved, and this is shocking, it cost $3 US, 300 shillings to get a wheelchair from Denver, Colorado, right in the middle of the USA, to Mombasa, Kenya. $3. It costs $3 to get a pair of crutches or a cane or a knee brace or an ankle boot. $3. Everything is $3 to get it here. And that's what? 2 cups of coffee maybe, a couple of Snickers bars. So that's the one way that anyone can be involved. And being a nonprofit 501c3 in the States, that's one of the areas where I'm always asking people to be involved, is to support us financially. Because without the money to ship and clear customs, then we're stuck. And our idea is not to hold the material in the United States. We only hold it long enough until we can fill a container.
Are such equipment taxed, especially here in Kenya?
Unfortunately, yes. We face extremely high taxes here in Kenya, even though the Constitution says that any item, any disabled piece of equipment or being shipped to a disabled group, all of that is supposed to be tax-free. That's what it says.
But that's not the case.
That's not the case at all. It costs more to clear customs than it does for us to actually ship the container.
Which makes it difficult then for Crutches for Africa to do its job.
It's a real challenge in Kenya. As an example, in other countries, and I won't name specifics, but in another country that's south of here, they simply wave our containers through. They see that the document is from, and the container is from Crutches for Africa, and the truck literally pulls up, they see the document, and they're there for 10 minutes, 20 minutes, and they wave it through. Nothing is paid at all.
But here in Kenya, it's a different scenario.
Here in Kenya, it's averaging that we're spending about $10,000 per container to clear.
Despite the fact that Crutches, wheelchairs are supposed to be tax-free.
Absolutely. We were actually penalized because we had more wheelchairs in a container than what was on one of the documents that we submitted. So they penalized us because we had, for some reason, they thought that we were, well, I don't know what they think, actually.
Have you tried going,
yes.
Making sense with them?
Yes, we have tried everything possible. So we're changing the way that we can do our distribution here in Kenya. My board has a great deal of difficulty allowing me to continue to ship to Kenya when it costs twice. We can send 2 containers for the amount that it costs us to send 1. So we could send 2 containers to, let's say, Uganda or Liberia or many other countries where things are much smoother for us. But I've been very focused on Kenya, and one of the things, though, that we're changing in our policy is that the recipient, whoever that might be, let's say it's a county government, as an example, they will be responsible for clearing customs, not us. So we have, and we've done everything. We've tried waivers, and we've worked with every group, and we've pulled every string that we possibly can to make it work. And there's always one more item to do to get a waiver. And we think we're done, and then there's one more thing to do to get a waiver. So it's been a very exhaustive and exhausting experience to try to make that work. So now we're just going to shift it so that it becomes a local issue instead of our trying to get our way through. I feel that the people in the Kenyan government at several levels can then come in and assist, and hopefully they'll have much more success than we've had. And
I hope that will be the case.
Me too, because what it's doing is it's hurting the people that we're trying to reach. That one person who didn't get a wheelchair, it makes it that much more difficult to continue to reach out to these people when, well, and again, I have no idea why they make it so difficult for us to give a gift. And that in itself is a very frustrating thing. We're giving this stuff away. How much did you pay for your mobility? Nothing.
0.
And so for us to give away mobility equipment, that's the way I believe it should be. And when we give things away, I ask the people who receive to take good care of their equipment. No different than someone giving them a cow or a goat. If you have 2 cows, one is yours and I give you another one, which one are you going to take care of? Both of them.
Right.
And so that's in the thinking that we try to impart, because of course things wear out. You know, the wheelchairs are going to wear out eventually, the crutches wear out. And I have to show you on my crutches, this is even made locally.
Here in Kenya?
Yeah, well, and anywhere in Africa, we have these tips made. So these are hand carved from usually solid rubber tires. And in the US, to replace a pair of crutch tips is 800 shillings. And they're terrible. They wear out really quickly. And that's what comes standard when we ship our crutches. So when those wear out, this can be made here in the markets in Kenya, and they're 100 shillings a piece for these. So it's $2 for these, and they last forever.
Wow. All right.
So it even is a small boon for the local economy. And, and that's just a whole nother area
in itself, which hopefully one day we will continue to explore. But because time has run out, David, that's where we're going to have to leave the conversation. But thank you so much for your time. And thank you for what Crutches for Africa is doing, not only here in Kenya, but on the continent and beyond. And it's my hope to see that hopefully the waiver aspect, that challenge will be sorted out. Because surely, why are we taxing? It's not taxing wheelchairs and crutches is not a case, but it seems to be a challenge. Thank you so much, David.
Thank you.
David Talbot, who is the director of Crutches for Africa, doing an amazing job in inspiring people living with disabilities here in Kenya and beyond the African continent. We're taking a quick commercial break. When we'll come back, we'll dive into the issue of mediation. Do you know what it's about? Trying to understand it. That's what we'll be taking a look at when we come back. Stay with us.